So if you haven't, now's a good time to kind of go in gallery view. If you know how to do that, click view and gallery and get a sense of the community that you're in. Take a moment to acknowledge your not aloneness, the ways that some of the folks are probably familiar faces, some are new. These are some of the allies that you go about fulfilling your commitment in the world, embodying who you want to be. So just behold this community of Pacha people all here to learn a little bit more about this possibility of climate restoration. And I'm going to go to speaker view. You can go to speaker view or stay in gallery, whatever works for you. My name is Mario Trigueros. I'm really happy to be here with you and to have this conversation. And I also am not alone. I'm joined today by Shiwu Ji, who is managing the technology, Maisa Arias, who will be opening and acknowledging sacred space in a moment, Tracy Apple, and I see some familiar faces, all representing folks from the board of Pachamama Alliance and beyond. So to all of you, welcome. We are in for a really good conversation that is needed for a topic that I think just about all of us care about. You know, I think I speak for all of us when I say, when we think of the climate crisis, it's hard not to feel the sense of hopelessness that comes with not only how big the problem is, but the scale of the solutions that we often talk about. Some of you might remember in the Game Changer Intensive, we sort of talk about there are 4 levels of influence we have. There's the personal, our consumption habits, there are relationships, there's our community, and then there are the systems and structures that influence us and that we can influence. And it's so hard to break out of that level 1 and access the level 4. So how do you actually embody a sense of possibility, of grounded optimism, if you will? Well, today is a really powerful, if it's a first time for you or a recharge in your sense of possibility. Today, we're going to be talking about a really powerful book with Peter Fiekowsky, really going into a goal that's actually commensurate to the challenge in front of us, and something that we would be proud, that actually sets us up to leave something that we would be proud of leaving to our nieces and nephews, our children, our grandchildren. I am very excited to have a conversation to you today with Bill Twist and Peter Fiekowsky. So you know Bill. Bill is one of the co-founders of the Pachamama Alliance. We often refer to him as so much of the source of our programs. A lot of Bill's work these days is focused on our work in Ecuador and the Sacred Headwaters Initiative, and he will be one of our people on this call having the conversation. But in particular, we're really excited and proud to welcome Peter Fiekowsky on. Peter is a longtime ally of the Pachamama Alliance, and he's been in the climate space for years and years and years. You will find he is a grounded scientist. He's MIT trained, he has taught at MIT, he's worked on AI and at NASA, but he's grounded in a transformational framework and transformational technology that led him to this distinction of aiming for a goal that is actually worth the work that it's going to demand, and focusing on climate restoration. He's just recently released a book that we'll give you access to, show you where you can buy it. And we are really excited to invite him on. And Bill and Peter, why don't you?
Oh, and I was actually gonna say, before we go into that, we're gonna ground ourselves and
Thank you.
Just in our practice. I think we're amongst, I imagine, all of you people who have been with Pachamama Alliance for a long time, and if you haven't, welcome, if this is your first event. And what we do when we begin our programs and events is ground in our sense of interconnection and our sense of self too. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. If that's not feeling right for you, you can lower your gaze and connect with your breath. Let's take a deep breath together. Let's take another one. At Pachamama Alliance, we say that with this practice, we open or acknowledge sacred space. This is really about acknowledging life, our place on this planet. So let's continue to stay in touch with our breath. And as you do that, just notice that if you're sitting, notice your sit bones. If you're standing, notice your feet touching the ground. Either way, however you're positioned, notice your weight on your chair or on the ground or on your bed, wherever you are. This is about noticing your presence, your human presence on this planet. And stay connected with your breath as well. And as you notice your presence and your humanity, I invite you and invite us to see ourselves as organisms that are part of this beautiful organism, of this beautiful web of life, of this incredible planet that we call home. And from that place of noticing our space and place here, I also invite awareness into everyone and everything that came before us, our ancestors, and all that happened before us and that has us here today. And I invite us to notice the great company we're in, everyone on this call. And of course, all the human and more than human beings and presences around us. And with that on our sides and on our backs, I invite us to connect with our vision for the future. The vision that keeps us here and that moves us forward. Perhaps a little bit more grounded on ourselves and who we are and what we're here for. I invite guidance from also the mountains, the air, the sky, the fire, the sun, the moon, and all the elements that inspire each of us every day. Let's take a deep breath. Exhale. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes and I welcome you back. And with that, thank you for your presence and back to you, Mari.
Thank you, Maisa. That was beautiful. So give yourself a moment to just feel that and bring that with you, your aliveness and your connection to all of life. Thank you, Maisa. And let's welcome on today's speakers. I've already introduced you, Bill and Peter.
Okay. Do you want, so I had the opportunity to speak with Peter a little bit earlier today, and I know he's in Stockholm, and I thought it'd just be interesting first, before I ask you any complicated questions, Peter, why don't you just share why you're there? I thought it was really interesting and great that you're there doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I was invited to Stockholm at the UN's Stockholm Plus 50 celebration. It's the 50th anniversary of the UN environmental program. And so it's a big deal. This is the first time the UN had engaged in working on the environment. And this is the 50th anniversary. And they invited me to talk a little bit about climate restoration, which has been a breakthrough I've been working on along with others on my team for 6 years. So it's a huge opportunity on Friday.
That's great. And yeah, so this group is going to hear it before the UN group, because they're not going to hear about it till Friday. You're going to get to talk about it to this group today. So that's great.
That's right.
You know, Peter has been a supporter and engaged person with the Pachamama Alliance for years, and I've had a chance to work with him on a couple of projects, originally on the Citizens Climate Lobby, where Peter was intimately involved. And I've had a chance to read his book, and most of you probably haven't, but I'll just start off by saying his book is, for me, it's just totally inspirational and optimistic. And it's just it's a salve, it's a potion we need for our times. So thank you for that, Peter. And I know everybody else hasn't had a chance to read it yet, but could you just start off and tell a little bit about your story, how you got into this and what inspired you? And then what's the primary message that you're getting across with the book?
Yeah, well, let me do the message first so people know what they're listening for. The message is that we all want to restore the climate that our planet had the last 10,000 years while we developed agriculture. And we all want to restore a sustainable population that will last on our planet forever, or at least relatively forever. And the really good news is that when you specify those, and we'll talk about exactly what it means to restore the climate, exactly what it means to restore a sustainable population, doing it, we have all the tools, the technologies, and the finance to do it. And all we need now is the leadership. We need people, Pacha people and others, telling decision makers and finance people, we actually want to restore the climate. So that's the beginning and the end. And now, the beginning of the pathway. I had been a member of the Hunger Project and then Results, which is a citizens lobby group for poverty issues. And I spent 30 years as a volunteer advocating for child survival, for various health issues to reduce hunger and poverty. And we were very successful. And one of my favorites was we're being asked by UNICEF in the mid-1980s to find a way to complete the funding of immunizing the world's kids. And that Results did that, and the immunization rate went from 8% to 85% in the 10 years from 1980 to 1990, and it stayed up at 85. Phenomenal impact. And we did a similar thing with microfinance. Now, I was just a volunteer in the California groups, organizing groups, and had nothing to do with the strategy, but it changed me. And by 2010, I could see that our progress on hunger and poverty was plateauing. And in places that are impacted by climate, things were getting much worse. Wars were beginning to happen, such as in Syria. The Syria war was directly related to climate. And And I remembered that back when I was an undergraduate, that as a physicist, I said, well, we're going to have to get a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere by the year 2000. There were a couple of papers that came out about that time. They said, yeah, about 2000, the planet will start becoming unlivable, and we're going to have to get CO2 out of the atmosphere. And this is not long after the Apollo landings on the moon. So I knew that we had technology to get CO2 out of the air for submarines and spacecraft. And I thought, that's hard work for an engineer. I'm going to stick to astrophysics. I'm not going to get in their way. They don't need me bumbling around. 35 years later, I could see we needed to get that CO2 out 10 years earlier. And I asked, how are we doing? And the answer was, no one's working on getting the CO2 back to livable conditions. And that, making a long story short, that's when I decided, okay, we have to have climate restoration. And I figured someone else would take it on because I'm a physicist. I'm not a program leader. I'm not a movement leader. I don't even like movements. And anyway, I ended up having to lead the movement to restore the climate. And here's the cool thing is, as an engineer and a physicist, I have a software business here in Silicon Valley. Well, they're in Silicon Valley. And we know that if you want to build something, you have to specify what you want and by when. And if you don't specify that, don't even try, because you're not going to get a result that you can sell. And so by specifying what we wanted to do by when we can talk a little bit more about that. I don't want to get technical and put people to sleep. But by specifying, we actually saw there are pathways to get there. And the people who knew the pathways went to me and said, you know, I've been working on this for 30 years. No one ever told me I could save the planet, because no one had asked the question before.
Hey, Peter, so the goal that I think the specific goal that you saw would represent climate restoration is important for people to understand. So could you just share with that? I don't think it's overly technical. It's pretty practical.
Yeah. Yeah. So well, I'll go a long route there. The light turned on for me at one of the climate meetings, the UN meetings in Marrakech. And a bishop had a dinner I was at, and he was telling us the moral importance of climate and dealing with it. And as a physicist, I was sort of rolling my eyes, okay, moral, schmoral, whatever. But after the second glass of wine, I could see, wait a minute, this is the whole thing, because the science doesn't care. You know, it'll be really interesting when humans go extinct. The books there'll be millions of books written about humans going extinct. But as a human, I don't want that. As a human, I want to survive. And that was the moral issue. And boom, what's the CO2 level that humans need? It's 280 parts per million. That's what we've had for 10,000 years. And that allowed us to create agriculture and a civilization. So black and white, 280 parts per million of CO2. You have to remove 1 trillion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. And it turns out the nature has done that 10 times in the last million years preceding ice ages. So it's not even rocket science. It's like, oh, take notes on what was done and do it better this time. If we can do it faster than nature did it. So that's that climate restoration is getting CO2 back to levels that humans have survived and that nurtured humanity. And doing it by 2050 while we still can. People ask me, can we do it by 2040? Yeah, we could do it by 2040, but 2050 is more poetic. And if you pressure me, we'll do it by 2040.
Well, I thought for me, the aha was when you explained that everything in your book, you explained that everything that we're doing about reducing emissions and getting to net zero, which is the conversation that we've all been engaged in, that we ought to be trying to get to net zero emissions by 2050. you point out that, yes, if we do that, that'll be an accomplishment that everyone has said we're trying to do, except that at that point, the CO2 emissions in the atmosphere will be over 460 parts per million, an atmosphere that humans and life, there's no evidence that we can survive in that. And that was when you said, that's not a goal. A goal is, what's the goal? And I love what you looked at. And then, so what is a goal? What do we know humans can survive in? And I think you picked a goal of 300, under 300 parts per million. So the goal you were looking at is climate restoration. We need to organize ourselves to get a huge amount of carbon out of the atmosphere and get down to 300 parts per million. And the thing I loved about your book, and I guess, I don't know if it's science or engineering or what, but you picked the big four.
The big four
ways to do it that I hadn't seen anybody, well, maybe I hadn't seen anybody else talking about, but why don't you just explain what the essence of each of those was? Because they're financeable by themselves, they're permanent and scalable. What are the four that you saw we ought to be doing and are totally achievable to get us to where we need to get?
Yeah, well, as you said, these are solutions that people have mostly not heard of. And you would think after 40 years of climate work, you would have heard of the solutions that will actually restore the climate. And we often say that context is decisive. And the context for the climate had been reducing emissions. And the scale of these is so beyond reducing emissions that no one paid attention to them, or even shunned them in some cases. So the first one is the method that nature uses to create ice ages. So if you think about it, the atmosphere pulls well, actually, I'm not going to go into detail yet. So the first is the method in the ocean, photosynthesis in the ocean, and plants in the ocean sink where there's no oxygen and they don't rot. The second one is what nature does over a long period of time, which is limestone. 99% of the carbon on our planet is under the ocean in the form of limestone. And if you've seen pictures of the White Cliffs of Dover, imagine that. And if you haven't seen pictures of it, imagine a picture of the White Cliffs of Dover. And the third one is another photosynthesis method in the ocean, which is seaweed. We can grow seaweed, which grows extremely rapidly. And if you sink most of it, then that can sequester the whole 1 trillion tons, and you can sell lots of products from the part that doesn't sink. And the fourth one is a whole different category. It's methane oxidation. So you may know that methane is about 100 times stronger greenhouse gas than CO2. And methane comes out of lots of places, out of dumps, out of cattle, out of rice fields. Rainforest produces a lot of it, right? All the rotting vegetation produces methane. Of course, oil production produces methane, which makes maybe a third of all our global warming. And so we can reduce that. But even more important, and the reason I addressed methane, is you may have heard that there's a potential methane burst coming out of the Arctic. And this is what happens. The last time our Earth lost the polar ice cap about 50 million years ago, the permafrost under the ocean melted and a huge burst of methane happened. There was a huge heat blip, and the planet lost about a third of our species. And so once I figured out that we could get the CO2 back below 300 with high confidence, like I don't see any way we're going to fail. Then I realized that we needed to deal with this risk of going extinct because we've already essentially melted the Arctic, and that methane burst could happen. And this methane oxidation gives us an insurance. It actually will oxidize that methane before we might lose one harvest, but we probably won't lose two. And it'll also bring the climate back, cool the planet back to about 20 years. So if we were to do it in the next 5 years, which I fully intend, then we could bring the climate back to what it was in 2005, which is before the really huge wildfires, the massive reef die-offs and so on. So those are the four.
Yeah, and I love the way so the first three, I guess, the limestone, the marine permaculture, and then the
Fertilization.
Yeah, fertilization. Those three by themselves, each one of them, it sounded like the way you described them, each one of them, if implemented fully, quickly, has the ability to bring down almost a trillion, 1,000 gigatons of carbon, almost has the ability to do the job by itself. But
Yes.
all three of them combined, it's like, I understand why you say you're confident we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And each one of them has its own financing built into it, which I thought was really important, the way you described how each one of them has a product that people want. So the financing is there. It doesn't have to be financed by governments. It can be financed by our economic system itself. And then you talked about the methane as an insurance. I think you said it's like an insurance policy.
Yes.
We need to invest in the methane oxidation as an insurance policy in case there is this burst. And I guess that may need to be financed by governments or somehow separately, because it's not necessarily a product that we're selling at the same time.
Well, it's interesting. The methane oxidation can easily be financed by the insurance industry. They're spending their claims over the last 20 years went from 40 billion doubled from 40 to 80 billion. And so doing it costs about 1 billion a year. And so if they were simply to invest 1/40th of their savings, then it would be worth it. I'm sure that they'll do that. In the meantime, there are a number of other mechanisms, such as carbon offsets, which can do it at least in the short term.
Yeah, okay.
Do the financing in the short term.
I'm curious, Peter, that so much of the climate movement has become nervous when we sort of get close to the possibility of geoengineering, and haven't we learned sort of to follow more nature-based solutions like planting more trees, regenerative agriculture? How can you help us understand that concern?
Yeah, so the concern originates out of let's not make things worse. That the climate issue started becoming visible back in the 70s when I was an undergraduate. And you may recall that around 1980, President Reagan had this difficult choice to make. He had to choose, are we going to use the religion of science or the religion of free market? His friends were all free market people, so he chose a free market religion, which didn't turn out very well, but it's what he chose. And at that point, climate became political. It was us versus them. And the free market, as you know, it only has one goal, which is growth, which is, you can't fail at growth. And so there was no specific goal about taking care of humans or humanity or nature. And so people never considered the idea of having a goal of humanity surviving and flourishing. And with that, now a lot of environmentalists said, okay, if we don't have a meaningful goal, at least let's not make things worse. And that's why there was opposition to ocean fertilization. There was opposition to putting anything in the atmosphere and so on. I've tried this on the road a lot. And now that we've established a meaningful goal, which is humanity surviving, everyone understands that. And I found no one who says, no, I think we should delay it. It's close because some research say, I think we need 10 more years of research. But if you ask them then, okay, do you think we should delay implementation? None of them say delay implementation. They say, go ahead and implement it while we're doing 10 more years of research. So it was a misunderstanding where it became political. And it's critical for everyone listening to work with us to keep it non-political. The survival of humanity is not a political issue. I've got very deep red Republicans and very deep blue Democrats passionate about this. And we're going to keep it that way, guys and gals. We're not going to just slip into partisanship. There's no reason for it to do so. But I say so, I point this out because in our culture, we have a tendency for everything to become political. If you don't keep your hand on the tiller.
I thought that was that was a powerful thing you said to me earlier, Peter, that the clear goal in this case, climate restoration, and describing how we'll know when we've restored it, that clear goal breaks down political divisions. Everyone wants a livable planet. Everyone wants their future generations to be able to thrive. Everyone wants a thriving humanity. So choosing that goal wisely, or however you came up with that goal, I could see how it creates the ability to cross divides and break down political divisions.
Yeah. And it takes, again, if anyone is engaged in this and finds it's becoming political, give me a call, give Bill a call, and we'll walk you right through it, and you'll get back out. My advice is don't try to do it yourself, because our brain is really political, and it's almost impossible once your brain gets into that kind of us them. On your own, you're going to go all the way, but give someone a call and we'll pull you out.
And I think each of the solutions that of the big four, the three that you're using to draw down carbon, they're all, it's not new, it's not geoengineering, it's biomimicry. You're using the practices that nature has done many, many times in the past to store carbon. So I thought that was a useful distinction you made too, that you're using biomimicry or geomimicry.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to be straight. I never bring up geoengineering. And if someone asks me, is this geoengineering? I answer a straight, yes, it is geoengineering. I call it terraforming. We're terraforming the Earth to look like Earth again. And that's clearly geoengineering. And then people drop it. I've never had anyone continue an objection after they visualize that.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to kind of get to what you think people can do from after reading your book or getting involved in this. And I want to tell you something I did. I was so inspired by your book. I realized I was with my two of my grandchildren, a 10 and a 12-year-old girls. And I realized what they were learning in school, because I'd heard some things they said about the fear of the future and climate. There's this story about climate change happening and their future being diminished. And I said to them, hey, I said a whole group of scientists. I didn't pin it just on you, but I said there's scientists that have looked at this issue and they've set a goal that we can achieve, and it's restoring our climate. And by the time you're 40 years old, we will be living in a climate where climate change is not a threat. So I thought I was inspired by your book, and saw one thing I could do was try and calm the angst in my grandchildren. What are the other things that you were proposing people could do? I know you've got solutions for people that run family offices and have millions of dollars. Let's assume not everybody here is running a family office, and we're individuals. What are the kinds of things that you recommend that we can do?
Well, we founded the Foundation for Climate Restoration for that purpose. And it's many of you know about Citizens Climate Lobby. So in many ways, it's modeled after Citizens Climate Lobby. And so we're developing local groups around the country and around the world where volunteers get trained to write letters to the editor, talk to your members of Congress, talk to commissioners, and take those actions that will make a difference. They're also developing curriculum for middle school, primary school, middle school, and high school, and university. And so anyone who wants to get involved or contribute to that, that would be fantastic. And Bill, I'm going to take what you said and make that the top recommendation, which is talk to your children and tell them, the tide has turned and we are restoring the climate now. Because it's a promise you actually make to your children, and that promise is going to drive you. Just as what got me going on this 20 years ago was making a mission for myself, which has been on my wall for 20 years. And it says that my mission is to leave a world that we're proud of to our children. And I told my family that, and they didn't let me ever take it down. There was one time I thought about it, and they looked at me, and I put it back up on the wall. I was obviously discouraged about something. Promising your children that we are restoring the climate puts you on the hot seat. And if it takes until 2060, who cares? It'll probably, as I said, as a physicist and engineer and Silicon Valley entrepreneur, I think it'll be 2040, but don't tell anyone.
Wow.
Well, you can use your judgment.
And I just, when I read the book, I don't want to understate, you're talking about going to pre-industrial levels of carbon. It's hard not to, nobody's talking about that. I think 350 and whatnot, or if that, the talk is we've crossed the precipice. There is no, we're going to inch our way back. If anything, it was almost unbelievable that that's even possible. Is science behind this? I mean, like, why isn't this more of a thing that's out there, especially among climate activists?
It is a phase change for humanity. I've been calling it a bar mitzvah for humanity. And so as children, if we burn down the barn or, make a hole in the carpet, the adults will fix it. Or if you burn down the whole house, maybe the family will move away and nature will take care of it for you. There's the Pottery barn rule, which is if you break it, you own it. We are adults now. If we don't restore the planet, then we lose the lease. It's that simple. I think we all know that. We don't like admitting it, but we're on the path to losing our lease on our planet. And as adults, we can actually say, okay, no, we're going to turn it around. But when the ocean fertilization idea was published in 1990, the guy's name will come back to me, Dr. John Martin. He did the calculations. It was very hard to calculate at first. It's very easy to calculate now. And he said, if you give me a half a tanker of iron dust, I can give you the next ice age. And he was shunned because people were still being kids. And as a kid, you don't say, I'm going to tear down this house. An adult can say that, but kids can't. And so he was shunned. He died of cancer just a few years later. But my point is, we haven't heard about it because our framing has been like children of God. That's almost a sinful thing to say, but that's how we've been. And it's now time for us to graduate, to have our bar mitzvah, drink that glass of wine, and live up to our obligation to future generations. So on the ocean fertilization, here's how easy it is. It'll take about 1 million tons of iron distributed very intelligently over about 25 years. What that looks like is over a square mile, that's about 10 pounds. Or if your metric over a square kilometer, it's 1 kilogram of iron ore dust. And if you ever swept off your back porch, that's nothing. So it's that little amount that's needed. And and if you think about it, if it were much more difficult than that, then nature couldn't give us ice ages. It would be too much work for nature. She's got other things to do. That's a little strange to say.
I want to add also the work that, so for example, the work that Paul is doing now, and I know you're in touch with Paul regularly, the work
Paul
that
Hopkins.
Paul's doing now with regeneration. I mean, he pointed at that drawdown point that we actually could start drawing down, didn't take it into a goal. The work that Paul's doing now with regeneration, if you look through that book, there's a huge number of, there's 100 different things you can do, each one of them adding up slowly. And I know in your book, you're counting on everybody still doing that. And if Paul was totally successful with everything he's pointing at, he would come probably close to the goal that you've set. It just hasn't been expressed in there. And the combination, I think, of the work that he's doing and then the work you're doing with a goal measurable from Mount Mauna Loa. Is it Mauna Loa on?
Yes.
Yeah, from the goal measured from Mauna Loa, 300 parts per million. That's where we're going. And we want to be there by 2050, no later. The combination of the work that everybody's doing, plus the things you're adding that are scalable and financeable, that gives me just a huge amount of confidence. I know you're confident. You're saying like it will happen. And I'm, after reading your book and talking to you a little bit, I'm getting to the point where yes, this will happen. And it's because of like what you're adding on top of what's already being done. You say we do have to keep the transition from fossils to renewable going. That reduces emissions. And people are starting to do work all over the world on starting to figure out how to restore, how to bring CO2 back down. And you're putting a bigger frame on the whole thing so it can work and so we can succeed. And so I want to thank you for doing that and offering that to all of us.
Thanks.
And Mario,
yeah, with Paul Hawkins' work, what's wonderful about it is regenerating agriculture, regenerating destroyed environments is critical. And if you don't restore the climate, if you don't get CO2 back to levels where we'll be around in 100 years, it's a little futile. And so what Paul and I do is totally complementary, because similarly, if we don't regenerate our environment, it won't be very pleasant either.
Right. I want to there are actually a lot of really interesting questions showing up in the chat, and I want to give some space for these. And I feel like that last point in particular is such an important anchor in this, that this isn't to preclude other movements, other work. This is with a very clear goal in mind of restoring climate by 2050. Which enables so much more, whether it's rewilding, whether it's regeneration. So it's just such an important distinction to get. But Peter, I want to invite all of you, if you want to consider a question for Peter, to go ahead and put it in the chat. And I'm going to start with one that has come up a couple of times from Peter Crawley. He says, fascinating. Are there any unintended consequences or known side effects of the geoengineering techniques you propose that concern you? Your book spends some time speaking exactly to that. So I'd love to hear your response.
Yes. Well, all of these have beneficial consequences. The biggest one is the ocean fertilization. And the biggest beneficial consequence is you get a lot of fish. And it's the sale of the fish which can finance the operation easily. And that's a beneficial side effect. Another unexpected side effect they've discovered when they tested it 10 years ago was it was a burst of whale births, because the whales had food and they started giving birth again. Whenever you have a lot of organic growth, you do have rot. And so it's always the case that when there's a volcano, you get a lot of phytoplankton growing, a lot of algae, and that will steal certain amount of nutrients from the water. And so downstream, they'll have lower nutrients. They're downstream, in the ocean. And also you'll have lower oxygen in certain areas. But it's been like that for 2 or 3 billion years. And that's what nature expects to happen. So if you're one of the animals which doesn't make it in that case, well, that's what always happens when there's a volcano or a dust storm. So that's the biggest one. There are false ones. People say, well, what about red tide? Well, it never happens in the deep ocean. All those things happen on coastal areas where you have lots of nutrients. In the deep ocean, the iron level is 1/1,000,000th of what it is in a pond or a coastal area. Let me think if there are other ones. No, interestingly, with the methane oxidation, the method that looks like we'll be using is iron chloride. Now, the chlorine is the same chlorine as in sodium chloride, and the ocean is full of that. So no experts are expecting any issue with that. The iron is interesting because that's the same iron that is used in the ocean fertilization. The difference is that the quantity is maybe 1/10 or 100th. So none of us expect it'll have a meaningful impact on the phytoplankton. And if it did, it would be beneficial. It would feed the fish and it would remove CO2. So I hope that gives a taste of it. And then the bottom line is all of these methods are short-term. So with a fertilization, after a month or two, the effect goes away. If you don't like the effect, don't do it again. The same is true of all the other ones, of the iron chloride, of the the methane oxidation, and the seaweed, the kelp. If you don't like it, just stop doing it.
Helpful. In your book, you highlight a lot the need for investment in these efforts, but one of the questions that's emerged is, can you talk about the governance of such a coordinated international effort?
Very important question and very tricky. The bottom line is this, and it's in a sense bad news, but I really researched it, that you can only govern something that exists. And if it's an abstract thought, you cannot govern abstract thoughts. So until these methods are being implemented and seriously implemented, then the need and operation of governance becomes visible. But as an abstraction, there are hundreds and hundreds of people trying to find governance. And if you just look at the linguistics and the physics, you can't govern something that doesn't exist yet. and then that's one part. The other part is at this point, there's no international body with a charter to govern whether humans live or die, right? The UN has not been involved in that. They've worked on reducing emissions, but not making sure that humans survive. And so it's not the UN. If it's not the UN, maybe it's the Catholic Church. That's not really what they're chartered for. So eventually there will be some sort of governance. The good news is that because these operations are profitable, this is interesting, they only work as long as they make a positive difference for humanity. So the ocean fertilization, which is the main one, as long as we need to remove more CO2, it will work. But when we don't need to, it won't make money anymore, and the people doing it will do less of it. It's just automatic. It's not as well controlled as it will be when the time is ready and we actually do governance. But there's no reason for people to overdo it. There's just no benefit to anyone.
Another question that emerges, will the glacier still melt and cause sea levels to rise in your scenario?
Unfortunately, there's no strong, unfortunately, the answer seems to be yes. Now, there are, never say no. So we don't know what will be invented or discovered in the future. But as a technologist, we don't have any technology which we're confident can stop it. And there are people I know who are working on it. And if you have money, you could be great to fund some of that research.
For the sale of fish, how would you connect the sale of fish to the costs of doing the ocean restoration?
Oh, that's tricky. The way it's being planned right now is with public-private partnerships with the coastal communities. So they get fishing taxes and fishing licenses. And so those government bodies then will share some of their revenue with the commercial operation distributing the iron dust. And obviously that gives an opportunity for governance, right? Because if they stop paying, then the commercial operation will stop doing it.
I see a lot of comments interested in the book and engaging with the Foundation for Climate Restoration. I want you all to know that we will send an email follow-up with a link to the book to buy from Indiegogo, an independent bookstore, and an interest form to indicate interest in learning more and partnering with the Foundation for Climate Restoration. So rest assured, you'll all get that information, as well as a recording of this probably later on this evening. As we get closer to our time, Peter, I want to give you a sense of, or give you any final words that you want people to leave with from our conversation that you hope they actually integrate and bring forth.
Do what Bill said, which is share with your children that we are going to restore the climate. And even if you don't think that these methods will work, create your own, put yourself on the line. That's what there's no better life than living into that commitment to restoring the climate. And your actions will totally motivate the people with the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars who will finance it, who are holding back because they don't have enough positive feedback from the public. They want to be heroes. And so our job is to make the people with the money heroes and fund it.
Yeah.
Bill, what do you want to add?
Well, I love this. This always circles back. I saw Sam Daly Harris in here somewhere, and one of his strategies for what individuals can do is write letters to the editor. And I guess probably the Foundation for Climate Restoration is going to help set up kind of models for people to use to do that. But I know what Peter was saying. There needs to be this idea that we can actually restore the climate. It's not like we just should get to net zero. Getting to net zero isn't getting us anywhere. Restoring the climate, and it's really restoring the climate in a specific measurable way. Under 300 parts per million measured by Mauna Loa, by the sensing instruments up on Mauna Loa. And we can do that, and we can watch it, and you can see how it's going down every year. And that goal of getting to 300 parts per million, which will ensure that we have a livable planet and humanity can thrive and continue the journey we're on, it's just such an important framework for the work that everyone's been doing around the climate crisis. So writing letters to the editor, I haven't written one. I was always inspired by Sam pushing me on it. And this is something that I think can make a huge difference. Peter was talking about earlier in a conversation. There's people that have these family offices, huge amounts of money in places where people are looking at how to fund the future. They're funding the future of taking care of their family, but they're really also looking at how to take care of all families. Everyone gets taken care of. But until they hear about this and see people talking about it like this is real, this is what we ought to be doing, it's hard for them to get going. They figure they might get criticized. So having a public conversation about we can and are going to restore the climate, it just needs everybody to get on board. That's something that we all can do, that individuals can do. And
it's the best game in town.
Yeah, right.
Thank you. I think I'll add to that this, I've definitely come of age in the climate justice movement, and I have a sort of natural sort of response to the possibility of geoengineering and what about the fossil fuel industry and how are we going to hold all of that is so in my head. And what I feel like you've done for me, Peter, is to articulate a clear vision of what is fundamentally, what are we aiming for? And that orientation had me for one of the first times feel a sense of liberation from the dread I usually feel. I've got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old of what their future is going to look like. This is one of the first times that I can integrate something that Pachamama Alliance is really strong at, which is holding that humanity is a keystone species. We can generate more life. We have influenced life, and we can generate more of it, leaning into principles of regeneration, and being attuned to the feedback we receive, as you said, so we can pull back if we need to. So I'm really leaving with this inspired by a vision of what our goal is, and committed to embodying what I feel like I've learned from you, Bill, of being an evolutionary activist and acting on behalf of life, so that this doesn't remove my commitment to climate justice, it augments it. It actually removes the dread and emboldens my commitment to climate justice. And for everybody on this call, I hope you let it work you. One final thing I want to say is that there is a lot going on in the world right now. And for our next Resilience and Possibility, we're going to do what we call listening circles. Well, we'll come together and really create a space for all of us to be in community, and to kind of ground in resilience and possibility. So next time, which will just be in a few weeks, we're really looking forward to having you for the next Resilience and Possibility. That'll be a listening circle to really be in community. And as we approach the hour, I want to welcome all of you to remove your mutes, to say goodbye, and to stay tuned for this recording. Peter, Bill, deep gratitude for both of you. And Peter, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. It was really, really important.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for organizing it. Thank you, everyone, for being here. The movement only happens with the movement. So
Absolutely.
each of you is critical. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.